Hello, everyone. I'm Bandish, founder of The Curious Mindset, a private community for technology leadership teams powered by 64 Tech, an IT solutions provider of hardware, cloud, and IT services. Although we're powered by 64 Tech, our core principle is simple: to always give more than we take. There are no membership fees, no catches, just a shared commitment to growth. And rest assured, this community prioritizes people over pitches. You won't be bombarded with any sales. Please do follow our dedicated LinkedIn page to stay updated on how 64 Tech can support you with any technology challenges, or feel free to contact me directly if you're looking to shake things up with your current IT suppliers. While 64 Tech delivers technology solutions, the hardest challenges about running a technology department is not the technology itself, but rather the human elements. There's pressure to appear all-knowing, which makes it difficult to admit what we don't know, or ask questions that allow us all to be vulnerable. That's precisely why the Curious Mindset exists. For any new members joining us today, this is a space where we combine coaching, mentorship, and community to help technology leaders grow. We focus on three key areas: individual impact, helping you grow personally and professionally, especially if you don't have traditional support; team impact, strengthening your leadership to improve team performance and results; and finally, community. Leadership can be isolating, so we're here to connect you with others walking the same path. This community grew out of my own experience and a desire to help others overcome the same struggles I faced as a new leader. I know how challenging that journey can be, and our North Star remains: no one leads alone. At 64 Tech, the mantra is "Together we grow," and the Curious Mindset is how we can bring that to life. Our mission: to help technology leaders become the best versions of themselves. Now, before we dive in, a quick favor. The Curious Mindset grows organically through invitation and reputation. And honestly, one of our biggest struggles is this: most technology leaders don't realize they need a community like this until they experience it. So, if you believe what we're building and want to support, here are 4 simple ways to help. Firstly, hit the bell icon on our LinkedIn page. Select all to never miss a post. Secondly, leave a Google review. It takes less than a minute, but makes a massive difference. If our team asks for a LinkedIn recommendation, we'd really appreciate you providing one. And finally, invite other technology leaders in your network by sharing our website. There's a short form on there to join, and Bryony will also send you a quick email that you can forward on. In return, my commitment to you is this: I'll do everything I can together with the team to keep making this better fortnight after fortnight. We'll keep listening to your feedback and shaping this around what matters to you the most. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers: our resident host, Andy McMenemy, our technology leader co-host, Steve Maxwell, and our brilliant special guest, Henna Pryor.
Badish, thank you so much. I make no apologies for continuing to thank you every fortnight for your generosity, your kindness, and your unwavering support in making sure that the Curious Mindset not only comes alive in 25, but thrives throughout what's left of 2025. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Henna Pryor, our guest speaker today, the author of Good Awkward. And I love what Henna says. Awkward moments aren't something to avoid, but powerful signals of learning, courage, and strength. And on her priority group website, I love this statement. So what are we doing to drive our best people to see their light, to have a clear compass that points to their next level of success? Henna, welcome to the Curious Mindset. And I have one opening question for you. How do you define awkward?
Yes, I love this. Thank you all for having me. And thank you for being part of a session where, the headline wasn't how to increase revenue or how to, be the strongest leader. You saw awkwardness and we're probably like, what is this about? So let me actually set the table and set the stakes pretty clearly from the jump. This is a very powerful social emotion of discomfort that is having huge downline impact on our people and the way they communicate, collaborate, show up, take risks, innovate, and all the very things that we want to do as growing companies. So I mentioned the social emotion of discomfort. This is more than get comfortable being uncomfortable. So awkwardness is an emotion that we feel, it is uncomfortable when the person we believe ourselves to be, our true self, is momentarily at odds with the version that we think other people see. So that external reality. Momentarily, there's a gap between our internal identity and that external reality. In between, we feel awkward. We feel uncomfortable because other people are seeing something different than what we think we should be presenting to them. Why is this a big deal right now? Because the strength of this emotion, whether again, for today, whether it's in yourself or in your people, can absolutely make or break the times that they will admit to a mistake. It will, make or break the amount of difficult conversations they're willing or unwilling to have, especially when it comes to risk-taking innovation, technology adoption. It is this emotion that can often hold them back, and it is a very misunderstood one. So I'm excited to dive into sort of what we've learned about this emotion.
I absolutely love that, because whenever there is a lack of clarity, Henna, our brain often steps in with our imagination, doesn't it? And
Yes,
it can start to distort the reality, and that then drives our stress response, right?
correct, correct. I think today more than ever, we feel like we live in a fishbowl, right? When we're, having a difficult moment or we've slipped up and mispronounced someone's name, we think everyone is watching. And in a digital world, often they are. And so we assign this disproportionate value to everyone thinks I'm an idiot right now. I should never speak up again. I should never bring that idea up in the meeting. When what we actually know in the research is that there's something called the illusion of transparency. First of all, we think everyone can see, oh, I'm such an idiot. My heart is racing right now. My throat is dry. We can't often see that. When somebody is bright red, sure, maybe a little bit, but for the most part, we don't see what you feel. So opportunity becomes, what we've found out is this: nobody gets to avoid awkwardness. When I say nobody, no neurotypical adult gets to avoid the emotion. The most confident people we know experience awkwardness as often as we do. What they have learned to master, though, is their comeback rate, meaning they don't get hooked by that emotion. They are able to experience it, feel it, and then quickly move through it, be it through humor, naming it, having a strategy. And so today, again, more than ever, this feeling of everyone is watching me and I don't know how to recover from it because I don't have the practice, we'll talk more about that, is creating situations where we keep our heads down. We stay in silos. I mentioned in our pre-call to Andy that I keynoted 5 or 6 conferences this past year and all had the same theme. It was one AstraZeneca, one Barclay card. And I would ask the leaders, I said, why is your theme called one such and such? And they all said the same thing. They said, our people don't talk to each other. We don't work as one. We are head down in silos. People don't proactively pick their heads up and chat. Why not? Because they don't have to, because they're used to door dashing their lunch. And, I apologize if I'm using US references, but I think you know what I mean, right? Instacart on groceries. I'm happily married, but they swipe in the directions to date. Theoretically, if I didn't want to talk to anyone today, I don't have to. I don't have to talk to a single soul if I don't want to today. And that is considered normal in this world that's optimized for smoothness. And then leaders find themselves surprised. How come they didn't bring that issue to me? How come they're not reaching across that, cross-departmental function over there? Well, why would they? This is something they don't have to do ever on a daily basis. And so it just requires a lot deeper exploration and intentionality to get our people to pick their head up and start talking to each other again.
That's fascinating, because one of our essential human needs is one for emotional connection with others, isn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
it seems very much that we're divorced of that intimate one-to-one connection because of screens, right? And because of this
Yeah.
isolation and social. So I'm fascinating to hear what you're saying about this.
Yeah. I think what is surprising to some is this began before the pandemic. This became, that this was exacerbated for sure during the pandemic, but the technological world was heading this way. So sometimes, the book came out in September 2023. So it's been about a year and a half, and people say, well, it's the pandemic that did it, right? That made everyone feel awkward. So just to be clear, when we're talking about this emotion, it's not introverts versus extroverts. I'm an extrovert. I experience this emotion just as much as everyone else. And we all remember. So again, we probably have a mixed bag. Usually in a room, there's a mixed bag that identify introvert, extrovert, ambivert, somewhere in the middle. Extroverts, I'm talking to you in this moment. Do you remember the first time that you had an in-person meeting following the pandemic and you were like, are we shaking hands? Are we right? We forget how to people
Yeah.
because we all had a period of isolation where we weren't around each other. Now, was that just a silly, momentary experience that we all got to feel? Actually, no. This has been studied. So there are professions that are isolated by nature. So astronauts, polar explorers, prisoners, not a profession, but people who are in isolation, and they've studied those professions, and what they found is that their social muscle atrophies, meaning in the absence of meaningful connection with other people, I say it playfully like this, but they forget how to people, meaning when they are around someone, they can't quite read their cues or their gestures or their facial expressions because they haven't had practice. They forget how. And when we all came back from the pandemic, we all got to feel that of like, oh, wait, does he like me? Does he hate me? I can't quite tell on Zoom. Is your brow furrowed because you think what I'm saying is stupid, or are you concentrating? Right? I can't tell the difference. And so we all got to experience a bit of this atrophy and how much work it felt like to get back into it, back into networking, back into in-person events. And so this is what we're exploring, is how do we start to look at this with a very different lens.
And of course, social muscle, like any muscle, it grows through use, right?
Mhm.
You've got to practice,
Right.
because if you don't lose it, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Correct. I think one of the biggest barriers to people doing this is, there's something uniquely about this emotion. It's the way people misuse the words. So let me throw this out there and let it land. There is no such thing as a factually awkward person. There's no such thing. Awkwardness is an emotion. It is a social emotion, but I will hear people all day, every day, and especially, when they're thinking about, oh, I'm not ready to present in front of a team. I'm not ready to lead the conversation. I'm so awkward. I'm so awkward. Again, if this isn't you, please know I can nearly guarantee this is at least one person on your team. I'm so awkward. Okay, so first things first, that's impossible because there's no such thing as a factually awkward person. That is up to you to deem yourself as such, or if someone else deems you as such. But that is not factual. What you are is experiencing awkwardness right now. I feel awkward about this situation right now, right? It is a feeling. It is transient, not dissimilar to imposter thoughts or self-doubt. It is not who you are. It is how you feel. So that first reframe is extremely important because it helps empower people into, okay, I've created this box of my own creation. So let's redefine that as I'm feeling this right now. The second thing is, like we started to talk about, Andy, this is not something that people are born with certain levels of potentially introversion or shyness, but anyone can strengthen any muscle through practice and repetition. So if you are someone who works, hybrid or remotely, you're not often amongst your peers, you don't talk to people regularly, and then your very next in-person conversation is, oh, I really want to negotiate my salary with my boss. Good luck. You've just metaphorically gone into the gym and tried to lift a 300-pound barbell without picking up 2-pound hand weights in the last however many months. And so we have to think about this in a way that those of us who, I'm 43. I was born in 1982. It feels borderline ridiculous to some of us. I grew up playing outside with my friends where we were trained on the art of social negotiation. Okay, you're the leader. This is my role. Oh, we disagree. Now we need to figure it out, right? There's kind of conflict on the streets. Again, there are some generational elements, but millennial Gen Z, they can't help when they were born. They didn't do that. They didn't have to do that. So we can blame them, or we can create a new level of intentionality as leaders about how we can create environments where these things become more the mechanics, 5 minutes at the top of a meeting, creating intentional spaces for people to, share their bad ideas, right? I like to tell people to share their cracked egg stories. What's one time that you stepped in it this week? Just 5 minutes at the top of the meeting, not the whole meeting, right? When did you step in it? When did you have a blunder? We're all going to share one, leaders included, right? We have to model. But these, kind of street chat does not happen by happenstance anymore. So we have to be very intentional about design and creation of these moments now.
And I guess they're always fear-based in the sense that it's simply, as you say, the awkwardness is created as a result of a lack of clarity for a strategy or for a methodology I'm going to use in this upcoming event, right?
Yeah, I think it can be a few things. Well, number one, and awkwardness certainly it lives in uncertainty. So there's two types of awkward moments primarily that I talk about in the book. There's unplanned awkward moments. So you're walking down the street, you trip over the sidewalk in front of an attractive person. You didn't plan for that. There's nothing you could have done to premeditate that. For you, that moment is all about comeback and recovery. We all have once probably done that little, oh, I meant to be running anyway, right? The little jog. Like humans have mechanisms that we've learned over the years to recover from those moments. So those moments, it's about the comeback. But then when I talk about planned potential awkward moments, those are what arise at work when we're trying to take a little bit of a risk. So I'm in a meeting, we're talking about a topic. I have a strong stance that maybe is a bit different than what everybody else is saying. And I really want to raise my hand and say it, but there is an absolute chance that that thing will land like a thud, that people will not be into my idea. And there is a risk of embarrassment, of awkwardness. For some people, they try that one time, it doesn't go well, they feel themselves go hot, they hate that feeling so much that they will never raise their hand again, right? They will avoid that feeling going forward. So the opportunity then becomes, how do we intentionally train ourselves to front load a different story about what that emotion represents? Can we do a deep dive on our own experience to understand what level of grip that emotion has on us? So for me personally, again, I'm an extrovert, but I grew up in a what will people think culture. Bandish, you'll understand. I think this is very common among South Asian families. There's a very strong, the community is watching. What will other people think? In Urdu, it's log kya kenge, like what will people say about you if you do this thing that other people might not deem in the social norms? And for a very, very long time, I drove my choices, the risks I would take, the things I would try based on this very strong narrative that was ingrained into me from a young age. What will other people think? And that made it very difficult to not want to avoid awkwardness or embarrassment. A lot of my decision making was driven by that. This is where it's really important to understand, again, at a personal level or at our team's level, how strong is that wiring in the people that work for you? Whether they grew up like that or not, increasingly for the younger generations, this is becoming a challenge. Vivek Murthy actually spent time in the UK, and I saw about probably 6 months ago, he came back with a report that said UK teenagers are struggling to talk offline because they're so used to talking online. Now, you may not have teenage interns yet, but this is your next generation of workers. They are struggling to talk offline. How are we going to prepare them to be able to make mistakes at work? We have to be very intentional now.
And I suppose it is a leadership responsibility to be able to make those transitions comfortable for our teams, especially as you say, the younger generations coming in. I mean, in psychotherapy and psychology, we talk about, the resilience being the ability of an individual to adapt well to the circumstances of life, no matter where they're coming from, whether it's adversity, whether it's trauma, or whether it's workplace stressors. It's teaching them how to become resilient, right? How to adapt to those situations. And that's even more difficult when they're, as you say, if they're introvert or if they just don't have, and they haven't developed that social muscle, right?
Correct. Yeah. And so I think to that end, I've mentioned a few times being intentional. So let me share a few more ways that can look. So I mentioned, cracked egg stories are one of my favorite ways. I will encourage leaders to have a bad idea brainstorm. So 5 minutes, everyone in the meeting share your most unrealistic, ridiculous idea. And they're like, why would we do that? Well, first things first, if you're only sharing realistic ideas, that's where all of your competition is hanging out. So is that really where we want to hang out? And often there is an idea in there where you're like, I know, I think that sounded insane, but actually, right, there may be a nugget there. But all of that aside, more importantly, research suggests that when we start with a meeting with something like that, a bad idea brainstorm, the rest of the ideas that follow in the meeting are more creative, generative, innovative. Why? Because we've let the guard down. We've let it down early. We've made it okay to talk about things that seem almost like out of reach or ridiculous. So that's one example. Another example I would often tell leaders is today more than ever, do things like micro disagreement drills. So one of the exercises I do with groups when I facilitate is we play red team, blue team. So we take an issue. So recently I did this with a pharmaceutical group. They are doing a new launch, right? A new launch of a new drug. And I said, okay, we're doing red team, blue team. Red team, you are advocating for the status quo. It doesn't matter whether you believe this or not. This is just the team that you're on. So what works in our launch? What has been successful? What do we want to not change? We don't want to, stick to what we know. Again, you don't have to agree with it, but that's your team. Blue team is we need to shake things up, right? The market is changing. We need to shift everything, shift our strategy. And on purpose, we did an exercise where they had to advocate and disagree with each other, debate essentially this launch idea. And it's purposeful in its planning of not necessarily being aligned with your belief system. It kind of forces some folks to think outside of their existing belief. But an exercise like that, what came out of that exercise was fascinating. It bubbled up some perspectives that they hadn't even thought of. But I don't know that they would have ever had that conversation if not for the safe space of the structure that an exercise like that created. So knowing that people are a little bit more difficult conversation averse, they don't have as much practice as leaders, create spaces where the goal is to disagree, right? To help to encourage healthy dissent or that productive polarity on purpose. Let's see what it feels like to disagree with each other. You're building that social muscle. So if they actually disagree with somebody next time, they feel like they have a bit more experience with what that feels like in their body. And it's not the first time.
In both those scenarios then, Henna, would you advocate that the leader should lead first? In other words, with a cracked egg story, show the vulnerability and lead with that first? And
Yeah.
maybe in the second example, where it's a bit more confrontational because it's challenging, would you suggest they lead or would you suggest they follow?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in general, leaders should always model what they want to see from their teams. And the big, I don't want to say but, the big bright light that I want to shine on this is only if it's genuine. So if you're not bought into this yet, I have one issue, my only issue with the conversation about vulnerability, and I do talk about this in the book. My queen is Brene Brown. I love her. I want to be her. Let me just be very honest about that. But part of the challenge of vulnerability entering the leadership discussion with such force is that some leaders have adopted what I've heard others describe as faux vulnerability. So faux vulnerability, meaning they've been told, oh, this is an attractive leadership trait. Leaders should be vulnerable. And so, somebody's like, oh, feel so bad that we didn't hit our numbers and nobody's getting their bonuses. It's really tearing me up while this leader is happily collecting their bonus. Yes. Right? So we're like, really? Do you really feel bad about this? Like it's not quite tracking. And so vulnerability, true vulnerability, the kind that we can feel, is not accessible to everyone yet. It's just not. It requires a deep self-awareness. It requires a deep emotional intelligence. And I don't think every leader is there yet. And that's okay. There's no guilt in that. There's no shame in that. What I would invite them to think about is awkwardness is a stepping stone to vulnerability. The difference between awkwardness and vulnerability is they do share some traits. So they share the uncertainty, they share a little bit of risk, but the thing where they differ is the degree of emotional exposure. So vulnerability requires a bit more emotional exposure, a bit more emotional disclosure, right? This is hard for me right now. I'm really struggling. I feel, stressed. I feel unsure, right? There's more just emotional exposure there. Awkwardness can be, I don't know the answer right now, and I wish I did, right? But I'm going to look that up. Or I feel like as a leader, I should be able to lead you through this technology transformation. But truth be told, I don't know what I'm doing yet either. We're learning together. Right. But it's less about oh, this is a big struggle for me. This is really hard. Again, if you are at that place where true vulnerability is available to you, please keep going. I love it. But not everyone is. And so I think there's a nice stepping stone spot that we can begin with.
That's fascinating. When you think about going on to the next part, I guess, which is the social muscle and also the atrophy. When we think about children at the early stages, I guess in preschool and up to the age of, I guess, before they start to engage with technology and have their own version of an iPhone, whatever that is, right? they have that social muscle developed, right? Because kids play with their imagination. They interact
Correct.
with each other face to face. They're not locked into screens all the time. So I guess they
Yeah.
have developed the muscle, but then it's atrophied by lack of use, I guess.
Yeah,
Where
this
would you
is
take us on
interesting.
that journey?
Yeah, this is interesting because the research has changed on this. So it
Okay.
used to be actually when I did my TEDx 2 years ago, the research that I cited was the Journal of Social Psychology used to say that most people developed a sense of self-consciousness. So awkwardness is a self-conscious emotion. Most youth, adolescents, develop their sense of self-consciousness around age 8 or 9. So before then, they didn't care who was looking. They didn't care who was watching. So I just want you to bring to mind your favorite toddler in your life, whether it was your child, your niece, your nephew, your neighbor, and they are in the kitchen dancing with all of their might to their favorite song with no rhythm whatsoever. They don't care, right? They don't care who's looking. Why? Not because, of some mental defect. It's because they haven't yet developed this sense of social norms, meaning what am I supposed to be doing? What do other people see? So it used to be 8 or 9. Around 8 or 9, that self-consciousness ticks up, meaning we start to look for our own identity through those social norms. What do other people see? Do they like what they see? And unfortunately, and this will probably surprise no one, in the advent of cell phones and social media, and unfortunately, some of these children having access to those messages earlier, I think that age is going down. We're seeing, I don't know that the research has completely gotten there yet, but the early discussion has been, 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds who watch their parents' YouTubes and TikToks are starting to get an earlier sense of what they should be doing or what the thing is that is the, desired behavior. They have access to that stuff a little bit earlier, so that number is likely to shift. But what we are finding is exactly this idea of social norms. We are starting to now be informed not just by the people around us, but by what society, what the internet says is appropriate. It's a lot easier to have communication through a digital channel. That's just truth, right? It's much easier to text someone or to DM someone or Slack someone than to actually say, hey, this is really bothering me, right? That requires a deep level of vulnerability. So social muscle, what we found in our research, and Bryony's going to send out a copy of the research study to all of you, so you'll have it, but just a few highlights from it. What we set out to study, and it was a US-based study, but I think the results would certainly map, is what is the impact of social muscle strength and social muscle atrophy in the workplace specifically. So I'll quickly define those terms. Social muscle atrophy is essentially the weakening of our social skills due to either a lack of quantity of practice, but more poignantly, a lack of meaningful practice. So I can be in touch with people all day long, but still lonely as hell because I'm not actually talking to anyone, right? It's this false vanity metric. I don't know if anybody in this space is a fan of Esther Perel. She's a relationship psychotherapist. I love her, but she has a wonderful quote, which I think maps beautifully to workplaces. She says, we have 1,000 friends on Facebook and no one to feed our cat. So what is the workplace equivalent of this? I think, we have 1,000, LinkedIn friends, or we've got, all of our connections on Slack or Teams in our organizations, but we don't know who actually has our back if we leave the room, if we leave the meeting. So we have this false intimacy right now. So as Sarah refers to it as, AI is artificial intimacy. We're connected, but we're not connected. And so we have to find new mechanisms to re-engage. So our study found that 44% of working Americans refer to their workplace relationships as superficial. It's almost half. 1 in 3 working Americans would rather clean a toilet than ask for help, which sounds insane, but we've now kind of randomly done our own version of this study on the streets, and it shakes out. It ends up being more like 50-50, and it shocks me every time when people are like, oh, I'd much rather clean a toilet. All the time. Ask your people, do an informal poll. They would rather do that. And then here's the one that gets me is that 84% believe that social muscle strength or social skills at work are critical to adapting through times of adversity, challenge, change, which just welcome to the next 10 years, right? Things are changing at a rapid pace. So 84% think their social connection is crucial to this, yet 56% say they would rather work alone than with a teammate or colleague on a project.
So they're conflicted, right?
That's such a disconnect, right? There's such a disconnect between we know the value of this, we know that this is important, and yet we've become used to working in, solo, or the comfort of working solo is hard to climb out of, which I get it. There's a lot of people who even, again, introverts will say it's hard to find the energy to leave my comfort zone, my space. But even introverts with one meaningful lunch, one meaningful connection, they're like, "God, really felt good, right? I feel re-energized. They feel good." Even introverts crave sociability. They crave being seen. They crave being recognized. They just, larger groups can be a lot, or the replenish time is different, but they crave it. But that activation energy now takes more effort because it's easy not to. We've got options to not do it. And so these are the thoughts that I think are going to drive really the future of work conversation and future ready teams. If you want your teams to continue to innovate, to brainstorm, to raise challenges, to raise mistakes, this is a muscle we never had to think about 20 years ago. But today, the structures, the environment is designed that they require a much more front row seat.
That's fascinating. I mean, I know most of our leaders fully engage with all of this, and they are emotionally intelligent in the way that they lead their teams. And as a responsible leader, Henna, how would you guide us on, I guess, instigating those courageous conversations, those critical conversations? I mean, if we see and recognize through behavior that some of our team are having a difficult internal conversation about their ability to do things, how should we step into that conversation with them and have those critical and challenging external conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely starts by modeling, right? And I think a lot of people still hesitate to just name the unspoken, which is, listen, team, we do a lot of communication digitally. We don't have to have conversations like this anymore. So let me start by, making sure that at least once a week I model what it looks like to say, I've had some screw ups this week, right? What about you? Or, there was a time that, let's say, a project earlier in the week went sideways. And I think it would help us to have a real discussion about what went wrong. I think specifically too, one thing that a lot of leaders expect to fall into place but requires a little more attention is developing a set of communication norms on the team. So here's what I mean by that. Is every single person on your team clear on what should be a Slack or Teams message? What should be an email? What should be a phone call? What should be a video call? Because in the absence of knowing exactly, we're all operating by our own set of rules, and we're all operating by our own preferred methodology and our own comfort zones. So my best friend in speaking, his name is Colin Henderson. I will send him, we co-present quite a bit. I will send him, so I have an iPhone. It's like this much blue text, right? It's like, here's what's going on. Here's the project. Can you please get back to me? Da, 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 da. And he responds with, got it. And I feel so annoyed and so disrespected because I'm like, there was questions in there, bro. Like, can you please, like it feels like a frustration. And this used to happen at the beginning of our partnership over and over, where I would, be detailed and he would give me a one-word answer and I would be so irritated until finally one day we had a conversation on the phone and he said, Henna, I hate texting. I hate texting. Can we just quickly have a 5-minute phone call? And it was in that moment that I realized I was certainly telling myself a load of stories about what his communication represented. And so with leaders, I will often say, what is your set of communication norms? So example, if you are in a one-on-one dialogue on Teams or Slack, and that message has gone back and forth more than 4 or 5 times, let's set a team rule that should be a phone call. Right? If you are going back and forth trying to get clarity several times on Teams or Slack, phone, time to move to phone, right? But is that understood amongst team members? If not, it's not going to happen. What can be, a phone call instead of a video call? What should be an email? How are we putting subject lines in our email for clarity, right? What are the rules around times that we allow an email to be sent? I schedule send a lot because I have a flexible schedule. Sometimes I'll check emails at night. So I can send an email at 11 o'clock at night. But as a kindness, I schedule it to be sent at 8 a.m. the next morning, right? Unless it is urgent, because otherwise, what do? We use our email boxes as task lists. So, let me leave that email unread so I don't forget. that I need to do this thing, right? We have to check it off our list by leaving it unread. So sometimes I'll go back to that email later, unread, I'll take care of it. Other times, what happens? Same thing that happens to you. Your unread email starts to move down because more emails come in. And then it goes to page 2, where what happens on page 2? It's dead. I'll never see it again. Goodbye. That email does not exist to me anymore because it's on page 2. And so that poor person who worked very hard on that communication thinks I have ghosted them or forgotten, but in fact, it wasn't described with enough urgency to me, or I didn't understand the urgency enough that it went to page 2. So there are mechanisms that we can create as a team to say, what should be an email? How are we using subject lines? What should be, at what point do we elevate something to a phone call instead of a digital communication? Just create a set of team rules. I can give some examples. I have a little grid that I can send along to Bryony that is just an example of one that a team has done. But this is something that really is team specific. If you have a global team, maybe you rely a little more on some of those asynchronous tools, but do it with intention. Otherwise, this is where you get stuck with the people are having trouble focusing because they have gotten accustomed to, oh, if a Slack comes in, I think my leader expects me to respond within an hour, within half an hour, within 20 minutes. And of course, if that's the expectation and hasn't been clearly discussed of, hey, as long as it's within X amount of time or within these windows, then they're always going to be checking for a ding and bling rather than focusing here and maybe making deep progress on a project. Just helps to chalk it out.
So as far as the internal conversations, these critical internal conversations, what would you advise our leaders to consider?
People today struggle to start the conversation more than anything. So one of my expressions I use often from the stage is, it's the start that stops most people. It's not the critical conversation or the difficult conversation itself. It's the idea of starting the critical and difficult conversation. So there's a few ways that teams can do this, but Brene Brown, her version of it is, she calls them, having a rumble, like we need to have a tough conversation about something. So because you've developed sort of inside team vernacular, sometimes it can be easier to say, can we rumble on something? Versus, I'm feeling really challenged by the situation we're having right now, and I feel like we need to have a very deep, important conversation about it, right? That can feel emotionally loaded and frankly requires more activation energy to be able to raise something like that. But if you create some sort of team shorthand about, hey, we need to talk about something, or hey, we're noticing that we're having a lot of mistakes as a team this week. Let's have a cracked egg story session, right? Can you create vernacular that invites we're not going to do this perfectly. We're not committed to having an answer, but we're going to commit to, having this conversation. For me, honestly, I rely just on a personal level, even as a leader, even in the most serious spaces, on my humor a bit. So for me, if I need to have a difficult conversation with subordinates, with other leaders, it usually is going to start with something like, I have to have a conversation right now that I hate. I hate this. I'm squirming, but here we go, right? That's just my personality, to be able to bring like some levity to what otherwise feels like a difficult opening. But I recognize that for me, that is how I get over that hump, that activation energy. I will also offer to leaders that, yes, this is an exercise in modeling. And yes, if again, I don't want to assume every generation is or every leader is of a certain generation, but if you have millennial and Gen Z people on your team, again, just a reminder, this is the generation that is less accustomed to initiating a conversation that puts a knot in their stomach. They do not go up to a attractive person at the bar anymore and ask for their number. That does not happen anymore. So we have to meet them where they are. We can be frustrated about it. We can, get furious about it. I'll bring to mind again, I know our employees aren't necessarily teenagers, but my eldest is 15. She's in 9th grade. And we were in the kitchen the other day and I was finding myself frustrated because her electronic hand monster was stuck to her hand, right? She couldn't put it down. I said, Layla, sweetie, can you please, just want to cook with you. I want to chat with you during dinner. And so I said the line that most parents say, sweetie, when I was your age, I didn't even have one of those things, right? When I was your age, that thing didn't even exist. So I can already see your faces. Did that work? Of course not. Of course it
They
didn't
have
work.
no point of reference for it, do they?
Oh, right. So she puts it down for a split second and then she picks it back up and my frustration is mounting. And then I remember I read this book by a child psychologist and what she said was really enlightening. She said, in that moment, what your daughter is thinking in lightning speed is truly, it's this phrase: I can't help when I was born.
Yeah.
I can't help when I was born. And any, statistic, social proof, benefit, anything that I'm trying to sell her on after the fact is over her head. The wall has gone up. Mom doesn't understand. That's it. This translates one for one to the workplace. Your millennial Gen Z employees, they can't help when they were born. If they get to swipe to date, so be it. They can't help when they were born. Our, baby boomers that did not grow up with the crazy technologies that we have today, and they struggle with digital transformation or adoption, they can't help when they were born. So we can sit here as leaders and lament how we wish it was, or we can find strategies to meet them where they are, which is usually about resistance. It's usually about, some understanding that lives beneath the surface. There's a fear, there's an awkwardness. With my daughter, it was, Mom, this is how we communicate now. And if I put it away, I'm afraid of missing things, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's about, not the technology itself. I'm afraid that there's going to be a million Snapchats to answer later today. Okay, then what if we carve out 15 minutes where after we're done our dinner stuff, that's what you do. You get to catch up on it, right? But we're not solving for the right problem when we don't stay curious and stay in that rumble, in that conversation for a little bit longer.
And I guess when you do exactly what you were trying to do there was to put the mental, the electronic hand monster down. That's something they've grown dependent on, isn't it? They've always had it. And so it's almost an awkward moment for them to do that putting down.
Right. I think for them, we know, I'm not saying anything new to a group of seasoned leaders here that, shame and blame is not a disciplinary technique that was working for anyone these days. But what we could all stand to do is go one layer deeper. So the surface issue is people are on their phones all the time. The deeper issue is, listen, I can give you 12 of them, but in one of the concepts I explore in the book is, they are, for me and you, it's our adult pacifier. It is an adult pacifier. It's, I don't feel like engaging with the world right now. I need to soothe. I need to, kind of go inward, and I'm going to use my phone in the supermarket checkout line, on the subway, in the coffee shop to avoid engaging with the unknown. It's safe in here, right? We all do this to some degree. Some of us are better than others, but there's a generation for whom that became very much, that pacifier has been in their mouth since early days. And so again, we can lament it, or we can try to create a reason that's compelling enough for them to put it away. And so, again, there's structures in in-person meetings similar to what people do at the dinner table, right? We're going to agree to put it in the middle. We're going to agree to, have a different type of discussion. And the one thing I would also offer to leaders is just to keep a bit of perspective. I recently spoke on a stage where, there was quite a lot of people. The lights were bright, so I couldn't see people in the back, but I could see people in the first few tables. And one of the women had come up to me before about how excited she was about what she was going to learn and the content. And I remember I was, 15 minutes in, and I look over, I see her, she's at one of the front table, and she is just...
Yeah.
And I will be honest, in that moment, I told myself a story. I was like, man, I must be sucking today because she is not in. She's not paying any attention to me. She's not watching. Again, I'm a professional, so I didn't let it throw me off my game. But internally, I was kind of like, that's a bummer. I finish. 5 minutes later, she comes up to me. She runs up to me. She goes, Henna, I took 1 million pages of notes.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
thinking
was
this girl
posting-
is on Facebook, on
posting to social
Instagram.
media how great your talk was.
Right. No, but I took 1 million notes, and it didn't even occur to me. She was like a Gen Z employee. It didn't occur to me that she was in her notes app furiously taking notes. And to me, again, that was such a reminder of the disconnect between the way those of us who grew up a certain way perceive any behavior versus actually. So before we go tell ourselves a story, one of my favorite little mantras is, as leaders, to find the humility to ask, is that true? Said by who?
I love
Is that true? Do I have proof of that? Said by who? I don't know if it's true. Said by who? Me, the brilliant storyteller who can make up scenarios in her mind.
Henna, I could listen to you for hours. I've absolutely loved our session so far, but I'm very conscious of time. And at this stage, I'd like to hand you over to Steve Maxwell, our tech leader, who will be fielding some questions that I can see are rattling through on the chat. So thank you so much for this part so far. Steve, over to you, my friend.